Okay, let's get started then. So, welcome everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight on our webinar on mental health and at your club. I'm joined tonight by two colleagues, Lorraine and Simon, who will introduce themselves shortly. Just to kind of reiterate my message that I sent in my email earlier, that if everyone keeps their webcam and microphones off, that would be fantastic. That just helps with the bandwidth and helps the webinar run more smoothly. You'll see if you wiggle your mouse, you'll see a chat button. So please feel free to ask any questions throughout. We will be asking questions of you, so please do answer them. It'll make the webinar a lot more interesting if people get to chat and share good practice where appropriate. And that's that really. Really informal, like I say. It's just a conversation. So yeah, please do feel free to join the conversation. So my name is Robin Levine. I'm the lead workforce development manager working across both North Yorkshire Sport and Active Humber partnerships. I've been doing this role for coming up to 7 years now, and previously working in a local authority and the Rugby Football Union and national governing body of sport, doing similar roles in sport and club development. So if I just quickly pass over to Lorraine, but actually before I do, if everyone could just start using the chat box and let us know what role you take within your club or sporting context, and then we can try and tailor things more to what you do. So Lorraine, over to you.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Hamilton. I'm a training manager for Hull and East Yorkshire and North East Lincolnshire Mind, so one of your local minds affiliated to National Mind. Been working there for about 9 years, as well as managing the training that we deliver. I deliver quite a lot of training myself, so I deliver the mental health and sport and physical activity. That's a mind programme of training that some of you might have been on. I also deliver things like the mental health first aid, youth mental health first aid, and lots of other things as well. So quite a broad sort of range of experience in mental health, really. That's me.
Hi, I'm Simon Pearce. I'm the development manager with North Yorkshire Sport. I've been working with them for over 10 years now, and I'm the inclusion lead. So my work's develops to include more and more mental health and well-being sort of resources and input into program-specific work, but also training opportunities. So I'm a tutor in the Mental Health First Aid England adult 2-day course and an instructor with Mind's mental health awareness of sport and physical activity. We also run a couple of programs in the North Yorkshire area, including the Think With Your Feet program, which used football in particular to work with people going through mental health and mental illness. So a bit of experience in the subject matter.
So as you can tell from those introductions, Lorraine and Simon definitely hold the expertise in this. So I'll be acting more as a facilitator and trying to keep an eye on the chat box, which is flooding through with everyone's messages, which is great. So we have head coaches. We've got Breeze, cycle champions, health and fitness activator, a mental health ambassador, which is great. Coach with Hull Cycle Speedway, project organizer for WA's Family Get Active project, health and wellbeing coordinator, run leaders, chairmans, welfare officers. Brilliant. So we've got a really good wide range of roles on the call tonight, and a good different range of sports as well, which is really good to see. Okay, so starting things off then, I'll go to Lorraine first. Can you just tell us what mental health is? And also, when you talk about mental health, can you let me know the differences between mental health and mental well-being? Because those terms to me seem they're interchanged. People talk about them both. So do they mean the same thing, and what are they?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about mental health, or when people talk in general about mental health, they're usually thinking about the negative side, so mental illness, you know, when somebody might be struggling. But actually, mental health and well-being, it's really sort of two ends of the same thing, really. So if we could just think about overall health and well-being, and think about mental health in the same way that we think about physical health. So sometimes it's very good, sometimes we're feeling great, everything's going well physically and mentally. Other times we might be struggling in one of those areas, and we might be quite unwell. So it's sort of two ends of the same spectrum, really, and something that we all experience, the ups and downs of mental health, exactly the same as we experience the ups and downs of physical health, really. So I think if people could start to sort of think of it in that way, it kind of normalizes it, because we all experience mental health different ways at different times when things are affecting us.
I think there's a great phrase that sort of sums it up, is there's no health without mental health. You know, you look at it holistically, you look at it's easy to see when you're physically unwell, but with regards to your mental well-being as well, that's all part of the overall holistic well-being of an individual. So it's important.
Very much so.
Those aspects.
Lorraine, you talked there about feeling mentally unwell. Now, for those who haven't experienced mental health challenges in their past, can you give us an example on what that is, what it's like, maybe, without going into kind of condition specifics, but just kind of giving a bit of an example on that?
Yeah, I mean, often people are quite comfortable to talk about stress, and you know, in my sort of experience and past sort of experience in work, we all experience things like stress at different times in our lives. But if we're not dealing with that stress, that can then start to become mental ill health. So things like anxiety, there are a lot of parallels to how we would experience stress and anxiety. Depression, you know, these things can sort of lead to mental ill health. And then if that goes unsupported, if people feel for lots of different reasons that they're not going to reach out and get that help that they might need as quickly as possible, then that can develop to something maybe more serious. So, you know, we can then go into what we would call severe and enduring type of mental health conditions, things perhaps like psychosis, those types of illnesses, or things like post-traumatic stress disorder, or obsessive compulsive disorder. So again, you know, mental health is on a whole spectrum, and people, it's a very individual thing. So, you know, people can experience that in different ways, and for some people it might be more serious, for others it might be more mild to moderate, where that early help could actually get them back on the road to recovery and feeling better much quicker. So again, it's a very broad spectrum, but a very individual thing of how people would experience these things as well.
So to link that and maybe give an example back to physical health, that might be like having an infection but not taking your antibiotics to cure that, and obviously that infection can get worse and worse.
Yeah, absolutely, to the point where, you know, people can be dealing with something really serious then. And it's the same sort of messages really that we try and get across to people, that, you know, the sooner you reach out for some help, and you've got to recognise that in yourself first to know that you need that help, and the sooner the better the chances, the more positive the outcome, really, the quicker you can start to recover and get back to doing what you want to do. But there's lots of things that stop people doing that. You know, people worry about what others are going to think. The stigma still plays a part and prevents people sometimes reaching out for that help, but there's lots of help there in lots of different ways now.
Simon,
I think everybody experiences stress and anxiety though, don't they? It's how people cope with those stresses and anxieties. It's part of the fight or flight sort of, you know, pre-programming of individuals. It's once those stresses and those anxieties, those can build up into your resources. It's once it becomes too much that you look at other ways to resolve those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very normal, natural reaction that everybody has, and it is those sort of mechanisms that people have got, and that's where sport and physical activity can be really important. You know, they can be things that can have a massive positive impact on how people are able to deal with those things. So that's why, you know, it's always encouraged. That's why the government have said, you know, you can have your daily exercise, because it's well recognised and well researched that it has a really positive way of helping people, and it's part of their resources to deal with things like stress and anxiety.
It's proven, isn't it? You know, the release of dopamines and stress relieving sort of chemicals within the brain, you know, from that release of physical activity. It's all beneficial, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Tracy's put something in the chat box there, that a phrase which she uses within her environment, the importance of being physically fit and mentally strong. And that seems to be well received by the communities that she works in.
Yeah, and I think it's by using the right language and simplifying how we talk about mental health, it really kind of normalizes it for people, so that they can see that, you know, it's not something that somebody else experiences, but it's something we all experience, but some people are just better at recognizing it and find it easier to perhaps reach out for that help. And that's where we can come in, all of us, on this. We can reach out to somebody who might be struggling a bit, and that might make the difference. That might be the thing that actually then unlocks that sort of possibility for them to actually find what's going to work for them.
Great. Okay, so during that kind of section there, Lorraine, you mentioned about stigma. Does either you or Simon want to just talk about stigma and explain what it is, and well, yeah, just talk about stigma, really.
Do you want to go with that one, Simon? Do you want to
Yeah,
start
yeah,
off?
can do. When you look at the sort of the stigma and discrimination against mental illness in particular, so it's not about mental well-being, it's looking at the derogatory terms used to describe, or some people may use to describe, mental well-being and mental illnesses. And then you can almost look at those detrimental terms and those throwaway comments and look at that stigma. I mean, when you look at the number of people that are affected by mental ill health, you know, 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health issue within their lifetime, but yet there's so many throwaway comments that are highly offensive. And imagine if you're going through an episode of mental ill health and someone's using derogatory terms or using negative terms around mental ill health. That's going to prevent people from asking for help. It's going to prevent people from talking about the stigma, talking about their well-being. It's going to make them isolate, separate away from it until their well-being's at a stage where they can cope with discussing things like that.
Yeah,
I mean, go on, Lorraine, sorry.
I was just going to say that research right at the very beginning of the Time to Change campaign, a lot of people who had their own sort of lived experience of mental ill health said actually it's the stigma around the subject that is far more damaging than the actual illness itself, you know, and more difficult to deal with. So yeah, language is really important, and just sort of trying to get people thinking, you know, what effect would that have? Would you rather that somebody actually sought some help rather than kept it to themselves because they were fearful of how people were going to sort of talk about it?
And as we've already discussed, obviously, if we don't start talking about it and try and resolve those issues, they may manifest and become worse.
Yeah, I mean, most people who come to us for support, as soon as they've been able to talk about what's going on sort of openly and honestly, where they're not feeling judged and they're not feeling that stigma, they usually sort of say that's kind of the first step for them towards moving forward and towards recovering. You know, so the talking bit is so important. I mean, if you think about your own life, usually that's one of the first things you want to do is is actually talk to somebody about how you're feeling. No matter what's happened to you emotionally, you want to be able to get that out, and you want to be able to talk to somebody about it. And it's just absolutely so true for somebody who's struggling with their mental health. If they can just feel that that's possible, then that for them might be all they need. It might be enough just for them to start finding their own ways to deal with it.
Yeah.
It is a big cultural shift though, isn't it? And I think we're starting on that pathway now. When you look at the media over the last 6 months, a year, 2 years or so, mental health awareness is becoming more prominent within the media. It's that cultural shift, and it needs to be that stage where people feel comfortable addressing negative terms within conversation, within peer groups, within things like that, because it's not beneficial for the wider society. It's not beneficial for our own well-being, and to break that stigma, it's a cultural change, isn't it?
Yeah,
So
it is. It's a, yeah.
You mentioned a few times there, Simon, about appropriate language. Before I ask you to go on a little bit further on the use of appropriate language, can I just ask the delegates to start just typing away in the chat box, just to let us know what you're currently doing, if anything. So are you doing any sessions online or anything like that? How are you engaging with your members at the moment? Is it all sports sessions? Is it you as close to normal as possible, or are you just kind of using things like Zoom or whatever to just have more social sessions as well? So just let us know what you're up to at the moment. And Simon, if I could just go to you, and if you could just talk about the use of appropriate language, maybe give a few examples of how to say things correctly. I know sometimes people do say things that isn't appropriate. That's just not well. They don't mean it. So if you could kind of talk to us about the language that we should or could be using, and if we do have a slip up, which we are bound to have at times, how we'd go about just addressing that.
That is a good point, because it can potentially be a minefield out there, but it's a way that a conversation or a description's put across by an individual. It's having that empathetic, that nature of an individual, rather than using it in a derogatory way. It's coming from a positive sort of background. But with regards terminology and language, with regards to mental health and inclusion in general, these organisations tend to go along the lines of social disability, or a social model of terminology, rather than the medical model. So it's looking at what in society is disabling an individual, whereas the medical model is looking at definitive terms with regards to bipolar disorder, about obsessive compulsive disorder and things like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Lorraine, anything to add on that?
Well, only that, I don't want people to think I don't say anything because I'm going to say the wrong thing. I think there's a danger of that people worry about it too much. But I think if you talk about mental health in the same way we talk about physical health, and use the same sort of terms, then I don't think you can go too far wrong, really. People are well, or might be feeling unwell, or so really just using a lot of the similar ways that we talk about physical health. And we don't really talk about physical health in a derogatory way. I mean, we can all probably sit here and think of lots of negative language and terms and phrases that would be used for mental ill health. However, it's very difficult to think of any derogatory terms around physical ill health. So, it's just about it's better to say something than nothing, and don't sort of overthink it. And again, sort of go more down that social, rather than trying to say, what's the right term for that condition? Just thinking about, trying to speak to somebody and get them feeling like they're able to open up, really.
And at the end of the day, if you ask the individual what is perceived as acceptable, then start that conversation that way as well.
So I guess
Absolutely.
from what you're saying, I mean, if you're going to have that conversation with someone, as long as you're showing signs of caring, empathy, you know, if you say something which may widely, you know, be described as kind of, well, not a good term to use, then I guess it doesn't really matter, as long as it's quite clear that you're showing, like I say, empathy and care to that individual or those individuals.
Yeah, as long as you're coming from that place of compassion, yeah, and that genuineness comes across to people, doesn't it? You're not asking, it's not a tick box exercise, I'm just asking you. But a good way to start a conversation is just to say what you've noticed, just say what you see, really. You know, so if you've noticed that somebody's been really quiet or just seem to be not themselves, behaving differently, just kind of reflect that back to them. And that's usually the best way to start a conversation, because it shows you've cared and you've taken the time to actually mention it, and you're taking the time to want to have that conversation with them, you know. So all of those things display that kind of compassion and care and genuineness, really. And I think that's sort of, for a lot of people, is what they're looking for, really. They don't want somebody to solve their problems or tell them, you know, what they need to do. They want somebody to listen to how it is for them, and then they'll kind of lead the way and lead the conversation, and, as Simon said, lead the language that they're comfortable with, really. You know,
Yeah.
usually you can get it from them once that conversation has started.
Yeah, and there's been another really good point, while, you know, kind of in the middle of all the other points in the chat box here, again from Tracy, about us and our role with as coaches and leaders within our groups and our organizations, of, you know, while we're delivering these training sessions, not just to talk about the physical health of our participants, but also to talk about the mental health as well. And us kind of keeping on mentioning it will reduce that stigma, and you know, make it more acceptable for people to, you know, talk about things and be open when they're just, you know, maybe not having a good day and they're just
Yeah.
feeling a bit down within themselves.
Yeah. Well, it's exactly as Simon said, it's treating the whole person, isn't it? It's not trying to divide these two things and treating them differently. It's, this is part of the whole person, you know, and one physical health affects our mental health and vice versa, you know. So really, if we make it all part of the same language, then, you know, it's part of the same conversation that people start to feel more comfortable with.
And if people always do generally start that conversation with, "Hi, how are you doing?" You know, if people are actually more honest with their answer and like, yeah, fine, yeah, you know, how are you? And it's asking the question, but it's generally not wanting that real response a lot of the time. I find it's
Yeah,
just something you say rather
there's
than something that you're actually listening to.
Yeah, we're in a bit of a habit of that. There's a good campaign that Time to Change did, and it's called #AskTwice. Because we do that, we say to people, "Hi, how are you doing?" And before you know it, we've moved on to the next thing. Whereas actually, we should be asking the question, wanting to know the answer genuinely. But also, you know, if you're not convinced, then again, just sort of say, "Oh, that doesn't sound like you're all right," or, because we pick these things up, but we don't necessarily follow them to that next stage of actually, you know, exploring that a bit more with people. We're very good at picking up on signals, but we don't always take it to the next step. And that's through, you know, fear of all sorts of things. Well, I don't know what to say if they say that, or, you know, what do I do? Or we've got our own stuff going on, you know. So there's lots of reasons why.
As coaches, though, it's all about building those relationships with the people that you're coaching, isn't it? So
Yeah.
you're in that prime situation where you see people week in, week out. You know what makes them tick. You know what motivates them. You know their passions and things like that. And for a coach to recognise a change in an individual's motivation, goal setting, attendance, passion for what they normally love, that's almost a prompt that there may be something under the surface there.
Yeah.
And there's resources and there's training out there which helps you to identify these subtle changes in individuals which may suggest that their well-being isn't 100%.
Yeah.
But there's also those courses out there which will give you the confidence to address those, that, as Robin says, difficult subject matter, and not to be fazed by it, but to get rid of that stigma and to get rid of the discrimination around mental health and mental well-being. We need to build up the society's confidence to be able to talk about that subject matter.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Sorry,
go on, Lorraine.
Well, I was just going to say that you're absolutely right, that anybody who is seeing somebody, you know, week after week, gets to know them really well, it's not being afraid of the subject. I think, again, because for years, everything to do with with mental health has been medicalized. People now sort of think, well, you know, I'm not the expert. I can't, you know, sort of, you need to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Well, actually, you don't. You just need to use the skills that you've already got when you're coaching and sort of listening to people and all those sort of skills that you've already got. It's just about having those conversations and allowing people to see that, you know, they can talk about how they're feeling, you know, but you picking up on some of those things, and that's just raising awareness, really, and raising your confidence to do that in the first place. And as Simon said, there's loads of training and different ways to do that. So I would encourage you, you know, to just do as much as you can to actually develop that confidence and those skills, because, you know, you don't need to be a clinical expert. Obviously, for certain things you do, but to actually start that conversation where somebody then looks for the right help and gets the right help, that's the key to it all, really. And you're in a great position to be able to do that.
Good. Okay, so we're starting to talk about how to spot signs of poor mental health, which is great. So what I'll do now is I'll just go through the chat box and I'll read some examples of what people are currently doing at the moment, and then if we can maybe build some of those real life cases of how people are engaging at the moment, and ways that we can potentially spot signs within their own environment, so it makes it a little bit more specific to those guys. So people are keeping up to date with posts on social media. They're keeping in touch via Facebook, and some individuals are messaging. People are doing online classes. Just keeping members updated. So I guess newsletters, and then also again the use of social media. People are doing Zoom active sessions and using Facebook groups. Take a bit more of a holistic approach in connecting and motivating families as well. We've got someone who hosts a Zoom virtual walk 3 times a week with clients and colleagues, which is great. And then they talk about the use of photography with wildlife and flowers that they encountered during their walks as well. Martin L, I wonder if you're Martin Lewis, money saving expert. My colleague George will be very jealous if you were. Virtual races and leagues. Yeah, I know I'm part of a few different virtual races and leagues that's going on around my area. And setting challenges to individuals and training programs in junior athletics, mental health groups, phone contact to set training programs, things like that. Okay, so we've got a few different ones there. So from just kind of messaging to using Facebook and different social media, to newsletters, to Zoom walks, to virtual races and challenges and things like that. So using some of those examples, how might we kind of spot signs of mental ill health? Lorraine, I'll go to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key things is sort of making sure that everybody can participate in the first place, and that's one of the things that we've certainly been conscious of and thinking about, is that it's great, all these things that are happening on Zoom, or, you know, all these sort of virtual things that are going on. But if you've got somebody who just hasn't either financially got the means, or, you know, for whatever reason can't do that, then Simon's cat just coming to join us. Then it's just about making sure that people can participate, because that again, that kind of holistic thing, because obviously a lot of the focus will be on whatever your activity is, so keeping people physically active. So it's nice that there's also some other things around the well-being bit, but it's about knowing your people, like any team. It's about knowing your people and just kind of being tuned into, do they sound different when you bring in them 1 week, to how they usually would sound? Is that becoming, is it just that they're having a bad day? Is it that they're having a bad week? Or are there other things going on at home that are actually affecting how they're feeling emotionally and mentally? And just kind of picking up on that, really. And I think even on virtual things, you can pick up on people's body language. You can see when they look really tired, and if they're really tired, is there something going on that's affecting the sleep? Because sleep is a really good foundation of good, positive mental well-being, but it's usually the first thing that starts to slip when we're anxious or worried, or we've got things troubling us. So it's just picking up on those changes of how that person is, and that's probably a lot easier to do if you know them quite well. So I would say that's sort of just those changes, really, changes in how they sound, changes in, are they actually normally the first ones to want to get involved in something, and all of a sudden they're not getting involved, and what's the reason behind that? And maybe taking that extra time to sort of say, look, I've noticed this, and is everything okay? Is there anything I can do to help?
Yeah, and with a lot of sessions being online and maybe not necessarily a kind of an open Zoom chat like this, where you can pick up on people's body language and different cues, it might be a lot harder to pick up on those changes. I know with friends at the moment, just last week I picked up on something that one of my friends said, and it just didn't sit quite right with me. So I ended up just messaging them kind of privately and not in a group message. Just, you said this, it just kind of highlighted at me as something that was a bit odd, something that you wouldn't normally say. Are you all right? How are you doing? How are you coping? And look to potentially put some strategies in place to help them.
I mean, traditionally, you look at the face-to-face contact, and you're mindful of the individuals and how they normally act, and you look at the behaviours, the thoughts, and the feelings, and whether those change, whether those become negative, and things like that. That does become a bit harder when it's done remotely, but it's having that confidence to be able to address those things. I mean, it's, if nothing else, if you say to an individual, I've noticed that they can say, no, I'm fine, but at least you're letting them know that maybe down the line in the future, if they do have a problem, then they feel comfortable to talk to you. So don't be afraid to sort of address those concerns.
Yeah, and it can be something, really small, like you've said, Robin. It might be just something they've said that just sort of sounds a bit odd, or, it can be something really quite subtle, but it's just having that confidence to sort of say, look, I have noticed this, taking that step to actually address it. And even if it just sort of sows a little seed in them where they think, oh, actually, maybe I have been a bit negative, or maybe, that's not really like me. I need to just get back to doing something that I know is going to help me feel that situation or whatever. And everybody's it's a bit of a roller coaster for everybody at the moment. It doesn't matter how resilient people are. It's a very up and down situation, because there's no certainty about anything, so everybody's kind of in the same boat with lots of different reasons behind it.
And some of the things Mark's just mentioned here, that as well as kind of using those virtual races and things like that, they are also doing quizzes and online socials and things like that. I know that's something that I'm doing quite a bit with my friends as well, kind of quizzes and online get-togethers. So there are still ways where where you have the resource to do so, to to see other
Yeah,
people, to, you know,
that's it.
maintain
And
that social situation.
sometimes that's a very subtle way of being able to keep an eye on how people are doing as well, you know, because it gives you that opportunity to just sort of check. It's almost a check-in without checking in a formal way with everybody. You know, so if you can get everybody involved in that sort of thing, then it just kind of keeps everybody on track, really, and then it gives you an opportunity to spot if somebody isn't quite their usual self, so you can try and help them to do something about it.
Yeah, there's some really good examples on the Club Matters website. So for those of you who aren't aware, Sport England has a club development website called Club Matters, which I'll send through the link tomorrow. And they have a really good case study from, I think it's a badminton club in Bedfordshire or somewhere like that. And they talk about their use of Zoom throughout this pandemic so far. And as well as the sessions, they have a number of different social sessions, from, you know, just having a coffee together, or to having a quiz, or, you know, people just using it to chat. You know, just can be nothing to do with their club activities, their physical activities that they're doing, but it's just members getting together still and having some social time, so they're not just kind of sitting on the sofa night after night watching the next Netflix documentary.
Yeah. And the other thing, another place to look for resources, which I'm sure Robin will sort of highlight for you as well, is that National Mind have put together an area on their website called Get Active, and that's got lots of specific sort of activities and social things that clubs and organisations can do as well, and it covers a wide sort of age range as well, so there's stuff that's more suitable for younger people, right through to the other sort of end of the age spectrum, where there might be things. A colleague of mine said today, I think, that there's something, they've got like online bingo and all sorts of different things, ideas for people to do. So there's quite a lot of resources out there.
Craig's just mentioned that he's delivered tablets and SIM cards to clients who didn't have access to the internet, thanks to some successful funding. That sounds absolutely amazing, Craig. Talking about veterans who have lots of lived experience of complex PTSD. Yeah, that's really good. Really interesting, Craig. Thank you for that. So we've started kind of moving this conversation on from spotting signs of poor mental health to how do we kind of, you know, how do we then take that one step further? How do we contribute to good mental health? Are the things that we, you know, if we do spot those signs of ill health, how can we, you know, try and write that within our members and our participants?
I think the thing to understand is that you're not really there to solve the problem, and it's knowing what your boundaries are. But what I would say is find out what your local resources are that you can signpost people to. So, for example, I noticed as people were sort of saying where they were from and what they do, then in your local areas there will be things like a local Mind or other local mental health support type charities and organisations, and it's also about understanding if something is more serious, then, you know, where to signpost people to the mental health services that might need to support that person. So it's first of all not understanding and not feeling that you're there to actually solve the problems or know exactly what somebody might need, but it's about knowing what's available so you can signpost people and they can decide what might meet their needs, if that makes sense. So, you know, it's a bit of homework really for yourselves and finding out. I mean, again, the National Mind website is really, really good in relation to lots and lots of free downloadable resources about all sorts of different mental health conditions and more general stuff like mental health and finances and sleep and all sorts of different subjects, and it's all free downloadable stuff. But also your local resources, it's about knowing, you know, what's available for people really. I can give you an example where the areas that I work across, there are different ways that services are delivered, that people can generally refer themselves. They don't need to be referred by a GP or anything. They can pick up a phone and they can refer themselves for some sort of fairly quick support. And that's just called different things in different areas. So in Hull it's called Let's Talk, in East Riding it's called the Emotional Wellbeing Service, in North East Lincolnshire it's called Open Minds, in sort of areas of North Yorkshire it'll be called different things, but it's all to deliver the same service, to get people that quick and early help, really, and easy sort of self-referral stuff. So that's usually, you can find that on your local mental health sort of part of the NHS. There'll be like a sort of main number and an email address that people can get in touch with.
Mental Health First England use an acronym to be able to start that conversation about someone's mental well-being, and it's ALGEE, so ALGEE. So it's assess, assist and support. So starting off with A, approach the person and start that conversation. The L stands for listening non-judgmentally. So we're all individuals. Listen to someone's concerns if they are going through a crisis situation. Listen non-judgmentally and don't feel obliged to solve everything, but to help the individual go through some of the ideas of how they can resolve their issue, because they need to take ownership of that. Looking at giving support and advice of what's out there, giving information out. Also looking at professional help, whether that's referring on to GPs, whether it's onto health professionals, and then looking at the other opportunities that are out there as well. Alternative therapies, whether that's mindfulness, whether it's being physically active, whether it's other things, yoga or arts and crafts that help the individual. So it's looking at that whole picture there, and it just gives you a step-by-step sort of ideas of where to take the conversation if someone is going through a difficult time.
Right, and sorry, Lorraine.
Sorry, that's part, yeah, so that's the benefit of trying to raise, develop your own understanding, is trying to get some of this mental health first aid training, whether it's, sort of a 1-day or a 2-day course. Then, what Simon's talking about is, it's about sort of that confidence of, how do I have this conversation, and, what are the next steps? What do I do? How do I signpost somebody? What's available? That kind of thing.
Good, yeah. So
it's vitally important, like you mentioned about the having a directory of local resources as well. There are national organisations out there like the Samaritans and CALM and things like that, but there's also local charities as well. So it's having that portfolio of resources that you can signpost somebody that maybe has an issue in a specific area and signpost them onto there. Yeah. So there's more and more opportunities and charities and support mechanisms out there.
Yeah. There's some other kind of comments on there. So Andy's Man Club has been beneficial to a lot of friends and clients. There's things like Men in Sheds and things like that. There's a number of different places that people can get referred to. There's a few different resources which I'm going to be sending out tomorrow. Things like 5 Ways to Wellbeing, which you can use to pardon me, to keep good health. So I can see time ticking on, and I have down that I have Tracy to share a bit of a case study. So Tracy, if you are there, can you just share your screen and unmute yourself, and just give us a bit of a 5-minute introduction as to kind of what you've been up to.
Yes, will do. So hi everybody. So I work for Rugby League World Cup. So we are the organisation that's responsible for delivering the men's, women's and wheelchair Rugby League World Cups that will be held in England at the end of next year. And as part of our Legacy programme, we are delivering a mental fitness programme to support community rugby league and community sport. So we're the first sporting event that's ever looked to try and use the excitement of a major tournament to try and inspire people and to try and engage people in mental fitness. And we've been fortunate enough to secure a partnership with the men's health charity Movember, and they are investing £800,000 to help us deliver a mental fitness programme across our rugby league communities, which is, you know, for the sport is and for community rugby league is just transformational. But the work that we're doing, we've done over the last couple of years, done a lot of research around what works and how can we deliver those messages in the best way to our audience. So some of the comments I've been putting in the chat today was just around some of the language, which we've already talked about, and what some of the research we've done is that we found that particularly amongst the rugby league community, people engage much more in the terminology mental fitness as opposed to mental health. So that's the terminology we're using going forward, as it is. It just seems to we've had much higher engagement rate in accessing services and engaging in our training and support using that terminology. So that's maybe just something that for people to think about. It's just maybe how
you think that's because of the stigma of the words mental health, and mental fitness seems a lot more acceptable, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's again back to sort of the sort of phrase that I used earlier of being physically fit and mentally strong, and they relate. If I say mental fitness, it's much more relatable to being about. It's being normal. It's about being a player. It's about being the best you can be, and that means you need to be physically fit and mentally strong as well. And I think we're doing work with some of our community coaches around how they approach that and about that terminology, and that, you know, to improve your physical fitness, you attend training sessions, you go to the gym, you do skill sessions, and it's equally as important to do some training and support to build your mental fitness as well. But yeah, the terminology seems to be really important, and we've also, so we're working with the sports charity Rugby League Cares, who have been delivering mental fitness programs for the last few years across the communities, and they've done a lot of work around the terminology, particularly with our programs that are targeted at men, predominantly middle-aged men, who need to access support and are not accessing it via their by usual health providers. So things like we run a program called Offload, and it's about just coming and having a bit of an offload and having a chat with people. It's delivered in our venues, so it's delivered in a sports setting, so it's delivered at the rugby league club. A lot of it is delivered by our professional clubs, so it's delivered in the changing room at the stadium. It's delivered by people who are branded up in our professional club kit, so the Warrington Wolves, Leeds Rhinos, rugby league team. It's their staff who are trained up to deliver some of this work alongside support from professionals, but they're trained up and they're in their Leeds Rhinos kit, and again that just seems to break down some of those barriers that people feel much more comfortable sitting having an informal chat with someone who they associate with a club or a team that they know, as opposed to it feeling too clinical. And some of the research we've done as well has shown that men in particular, or men and boys, prefer to receive their messaging about their mental fitness from professional sports stars. That is their preferred message of receiving, their preferred way of receiving those messages. So we're about to embark on delivering a awareness raising program and training program to build resilience in teenage rugby league players, and we're training up former professional rugby league players to deliver that for us. So we've recruited so far around 15 ex-players who have all got sort of that lived experience. So it's people who have had, you know, they've had challenges either in their personal life or in their career as a rugby league player, and we're now training them up to go and deliver these messages to young people. So one of our deliverers is a player called Keith Senior, who played for Leeds Rhinos, for England, for Great Britain. He is a 6'4". He's a big bloke, bald head. He's the sort of person who you probably won't want to meet in the street in daylight. He's quite scary. He's got quite a presence. He says himself, his introduction when he does any speeches, "I've got a resting bitch face," and that, he looks not a very approachable person. And he's one of the people that actually goes out and delivers our training for us. So he sits with our teenage rugby league players, and for them, having someone who they see as, a hard man of rugby league, openly saying to them, I was in a really bad place. I didn't access help when I needed it, and it didn't help me. And he openly talks through the challenges he had, and how he struggled to access support, and how he wishes that the support that's available now was available for him, and providing tips and guidance to them. And we're finding that is having a really positive effect. So I think I know it's challenging getting access to top level elite sports stars, but I think even within your club, if you've got maybe some of your open age players or senior players who may be playing at a higher level within your club, even if they're not at the highest elite level, having them maybe providing some key messaging to particularly your younger players might help with delivering some of that. And I think as an industry within sport, there's a lot that we can do around using our professional athletes to help push out key messages and help just reduce that stigma around, it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to talk.
Thanks, Tracy. That's some really good stuff that you're doing, and some really good examples on what other clubs can be doing and how they can engage some of the senior members that maybe those juniors look up to use those guys as role models, and make it, like you say, make it acceptable to talk and acceptable to not be okay. So that kind of brings us towards the end of tonight. So we'll kind of open the chat box to questions. If anyone's got any questions for either Tracy, Simon, or Lorraine. And before anyone asks, I'm not sure Tracy will get Keith Senior to come to your club. Just while we're waiting for some of those questions to pop through, if there are any, just to let you know that tomorrow at some point I'll be sending through some resources which we have all around mental health. The recording of tonight's webinar will be put on our YouTube account, both at Active Humber and North Yorkshire Sport, within the next couple of days. So if you want to watch back or kind of send on to any of your colleagues, please feel free to do so. There is a more in-depth mental health awareness for sport and physical activity course, which was developed with Mind and UK Coaching. That is, it's a 3.5 hour course, and that is online now, and that is going to be made free of charge to people from the 18th of May, which is Mental Health Awareness Week. So I'll put the link through on the email to that as well, which is definitely worthwhile doing. That just covers some of the things that we spoke about tonight, but goes into things in a little more depth. North Yorkshire are also running a mental health for oneself webinar next Tuesday evening called My Mind Matters. So if you go onto the North Yorkshire Sport website, you can go on there. Some things that people are talking about tonight with delivering sessions online, both on the Active Humber and North Yorkshire Sport websites, there is additional information on safeguarding, because it's a completely different game delivering sessions over the internet than it is face to face. So please do have a look at our websites under the safeguarding part, and you'll see information on both delivering sessions to adults and children and young people. And I'll also be sending through a survey on tonight to let us know how you found it, what you've learned, if there's anything that you're going to change within your own practice because you attended tonight. And if you want to let us know about any further different webinars that we can organise, then we will do so, which is great. Oh, and one last thing from me before I start going through those questions. We also have a context survey, which we're currently doing at the moment. So if you are familiar, North Yorkshire Sport do an annual context survey. So anyone delivering sport and physical activity, it's basically an annual health check, and we use that information to basically design our work program for the next year. That was done in February, March, but obviously we are aware that things are a little bit different now. So this one's a lot shorter and sharper than the other one. It's only 5 questions long, so it'll be very quick. I'll put the link in the email to that as well, so I'd be very grateful if you were to fill that in. Okay, so going to the chat box. Do people find it difficult to get senior people to open up about their mental health? We need more leaders and people in charge to start taking, in my opinion. So what are other people's thoughts on that? Trying to, like Tracy said, trying to engage those senior members of the club, trying to get them to open up. So if anyone's got any examples of that from within the group, please do say. Thank you, really interesting. Look forward to the links. More bedtime reading, definitely. Really enjoyed the session. Glad I didn't mention I'm just down the road from the RFU at Twickenham. I still work for the RFU, Helen, it's fine. Great session. So has anyone, Simon, Lorraine or Tracy, have you got any examples or ways that people can engage those senior members where maybe there is still a bit of a stigma within the club to try and break down those barriers?
I think a lot of the stuff that's going on with clubs, as Tracy has said, I think now that you've got quite a lot of prominent sports people being very open and honest about their mental health experiences, then I think it's kind of using some of the stuff that's already out there. So I've already mentioned Time to Talk, Time to Change, and that campaign. If you're not aware of it, look it up. But on YouTube, there's some really good videos, and a lot of very prominent sports people have got involved. So, you know, people like Freddie Flintoft, lots of different footballers, rugby players, you know, so I think actually using some of that material to get your own group of people thinking about it, talking about it, kind of having those normal conversations, I think that can be a bit of a way in then to other people kind of thinking, well, actually, perhaps I could speak out and use my experience to benefit other people, the younger people in the group, you know, that kind of thing, along the lines that Tracy's been talking about, really. It only actually takes one person to say, that's my experience, and I can guarantee 5 more people will say, oh, well, actually, yeah, that I've had that experience, but I've just never talked about it before. So if you can just kind of get one person to do it, it kind of opens the floodgates then, because people start to realise, oh, well, actually, yeah, it is more common and more normal, and, you know, more of an experience than lots of people have got than we actually know. But again, because of that stigma, people don't necessarily talk about it openly.
Yeah, and as Simon said earlier, 1 in 4 people throughout their lifetime suffers from poor mental health. So, you know, if you're going to engage your members, you know, even if you just engage one of your senior teams, you're bound to have, you know, a few people in there that, you know, that have kind of suffered along the way. So all it takes is just getting one of those to open up, and like Lorraine just said, as soon as one person says, yeah, that's actually something that I've struggled with, then, you know, rest assured the gates will open and other people will start to feel safer in kind of relaying that message as well.
If you look at community clubs, it's mandatory to have first aiders within the team, isn't it? They should be mandatory to have mental health first aiders there, mental health champions, so that that cultural shift starts there, and
Yeah.
makes it okay to talk, whether it's from the grassroots, junior development coach up to professional team leaders and professional players being able to discuss and talk about their well-being. So it's that overall cultural shift that we need to support and recognise as well.
I noticed, sorry, go on, Tracy.
I was going to say, I think what we found is that particularly within the rugby league players that we're working with, they're more than happy to get involved, and they want to give something back. They want to try and, you know, help and make sure that people don't go through the same challenges that they've been through, or that, you know, the younger generation are better equipped to deal with that. And a lot of the time, I think they don't think that they've got much to offer. And I think it's just asking them to share their stories, and literally, I think some of them don't realise that actually them just sitting down with someone and just talking through their, you know, their experience and their stories, they don't realise the difference it can make. And when you kind of say to them, you know, we want you to become involved, and they're maybe a bit nervous around, well, what does it involve? And when we say, well, it's just sitting down and talking to someone through your journey and your story, you know, they're kind of like, oh, is that it? Well, I can do that. That's easy. I can talk about myself. You know, I think sometimes people get a bit worried around the terminology they use, that they're not an expert in things, and it's just around, I suppose, how you approach it, that you're not asking someone to counsel someone or provide that professional support. You're just asking them to share their story and share their journey.
I noticed that it's Craig who sort of said, oh, it's the over 60s and I'm a time to change sort of ambassador or champion, and I think that's where things like Men in Sheds are a good model to follow, because and again the kind of language is important, because, you know, the older generation, I don't think you're going to change their mindset around mental health and the overall well-being, but if you're talking about sort of just staying well, you know, and staying in that sort of that place where they're still enjoying life and they can manage the ups and downs that come with, you know, sort of growing older, then that might be a way to kind of incorporate those conversations without them actually realizing that's what they're talking about, you know. So sometimes that it's about changing the focus of what you're trying to achieve by changing the language and sort of the model of what you're doing with people. You know, sometimes just actually being sat around doing some arts and crafts. I mean, that, you know, all these other groups that are going on out in the community, knit and natter, craft groups, all sorts of things, you know, they're all actually helping people deal with their mental well-being, as well as being active and being a network and all those kinds of things as well. So there's lots of different ways to approach it and do it. And I suppose it's just trying to sort of keep trying different ways until you find what works for your group of people, really.
Yeah, we found when we're trying to engage the elder generation in sport and physical activity that quite a lot of the time they're not bothered about sport and physical activity. It's more that social side that they're interested in. So we try and get them physically active by stealth, really. So, you know, we'll get them to a coffee morning and we're like, oh, well, why are you there? You know, let's play a game.
Let's do a bit of stretching. And,
a bit of chair-based exercise. So maybe, you know, maybe something like that will help.
I think the best thing I've seen since the lockdown was the care home, where they'd got them doing their own version of Hungry Hippos. With like have you seen it, with the broomsticks and the buckets on the end, and they're all going in the wheelchairs, grabbing the coloured balls in the middle. And I thought, that's brilliant, you know, because like you say, it's exercise and activity by stealth, isn't it? But it's fun, and it's that getting together with people and all the other important things that are good for our mental well-being.
I think Robin, I think you mentioned it earlier around there. It's Mental Health Awareness Week next week. So for people who are asking around, you know, how you use sports stars to try and engage young people, I imagine a lot of sports will be pushing content out next week, maybe having professional sports stars or elite players talking around mental health, and that might be a good opportunity to try and share some of that content with your community club members and your networks, to start having that conversation. But yeah, it does start from next week, so I'm sure there'll be lots of stuff on social media next week that might just be a good starting point for people to start sharing across your networks.
Great shout, Tracy, and especially with us using a lot of social media ourselves to engage with our members at the moment, it'd be quite easy just to kind of share on those videos and post them within your own club groups and your own club environments. And you know, I think you're not gonna get there by posting one video or just mentioning, you know, it's okay to talk once. It's got to be that continued message, and you know, that just reassuring people constantly that it's, you know, both physical and mental health that you're looking after within your environment.
If anybody's interested, where we did before lockdown, we did an interview with Ricky Hatton, the professional boxer. So we've got that going out next week. So we were lucky enough to get that filmed before we went into lockdown. We did have a few other people lined up that we've had to delay, but yeah, if anyone's interested in hearing Ricky Hatton's story, that'll be on our social media channels next week.
Brilliant. Tracy, if you could just let me know what social media channels they are, I will put that in my email tomorrow morning. Well, so Lorraine, Simon, Tracy, and everyone, thank you very much for attending. It's been great conversation tonight, guys. Thank you very much, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.